Hey, this is Nick Millivoy.
And this is Jason Shadrick.
And this is the 100 Guitarist podcast, where we're talking about a different guitarist each week that we think you should know.
And today we are hitting Yacht Rock's biggest guitar hero, I would think it's safe to say. Steve Lukather, who is, I don't know, can somewhat be a polarizing guy, although...
Oh, is that right?
I think so. I think some people can't connect with it. Some people can. But yeah, he's, I've been lucky enough to, as we'll talk about, had some interactions with him, and I am Team Lukather from here on out.
All right. Well, let us know what team you're on after you listen to this episode by getting at us at 100 Guitarist. That's 100 Guitarists at premierguitar.com. Or you can give us a call, leave us a voicemail, or send us a text at 319-423-9734. We love to hear from you. We love, comments, emails, texts, all that stuff. We also love rating and reviews. When you can do that, we are on YouTube. We are anywhere you can find your podcast. So anywhere you can let the world know about the 100 Guitarist podcast, we very much appreciate it.
Today's episode is sponsored by EMG Pickups, and they're offering a special discount for our 100 Guitarist listeners and viewers. If you use the code EMG100 at checkout, you get 15% off your order. Since 1976, EMG has been making incredible active pickups. Rob Turner invented active pickup technology, and they offer low noise benefits consistent across any stage or studio.
EMG's products have been used by artists such as Metallica, David Gilmour, Prince, Living Colour, Judas Priest, Zakk Wylde, Slayer, Les Claypool, and Steve Lukather.
And I think there's even a Steve Lukather pre-wired pickguard I think I saw on their website you can check out. Just drop it in.
If you come out of this podcast as the biggest Steve Lukather fan ever, you know you're hitting up EMG to get that product.
Totally. Drop it in a Strat. Let's go.
Yeah, man. All right, so EMG's solderless wiring kit comes with any new pickup, and it makes it easy to install yourself, so you have no excuses not to get that Steve Lukather pickup set. And that's even better, EMG offers great customer support for their products. So don't forget that code EMG100. Get your 15% off at checkout, and let's go.
All right, Steve Lukather, who I, in my later years, let's say, have developed a bigger appreciation for.
Okay.
It wasn't, when I first heard Toto was probably the first time I really heard him, knowingly, I guess you could say. Music didn't quite hit me as much as other things that I was digging at the time. But I went on a long journey. Maybe it took 25 years for me to finally come around and be on Team Lukather.
Yeah, I would say that I've had the same experience, and I don't think that we're alone here. You know, in the 90s, when I was getting to know all these players, and I would see Steve Lukather in various guitar magazines, you know, in ads and features, all that stuff. And I just, as a teenager, I wasn't digging on Toto. That was not my thing. Probably I was changing the radio when Toto came on. But, you know, it's like as you go on, get a little bit older, start working, at working yourself on the guitar and getting gigs. And you start realizing that Steve Lukather is on all these songs with perfect guitar parts. It's like, that's when I came back to Toto with a different appreciation of like how deep that stuff actually is and how musically complicated some of that stuff is, but it sounds like there's so much finesse that it just like comes off with ease.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And in doing research for this episode, I was kind of bummed that streaming has not been kind to Toto and Steve Lukather's output. And what I mean by that is not everything, their albums aren't all on streaming.
Okay.
Some of the stuff that I was looking for, like we're going to talk about like 3 of our favorite tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the tracks I had to go to YouTube because they're just not on.
Fan.
Yeah, they're just not on streaming.
So I thought you were going somewhere else with that. I thought when you said that streaming hasn't been kind to Toto, it's for the same reason that I feel like streaming hasn't been kind to Steely Dan or other other bands of that ilk. Um, I'm not a hi-fi guy at all. I do not have like a fancy setup or anything, but I mean, you put a CD and you put a record on, it sounds better than streaming. And
Mhm.
like I was listening to I did all my prep for this episode listening to streaming, and I started thinking I even have like I have a couple Toto LPs. I have Toto 4 downstairs. I don't have a record player up here. And you know, I didn't put it on, and I was actively thinking about how it doesn't sound as good on streaming.
Yeah.
And that music, I mean, you could say that about anything, but I feel like that particular era of LA studio music, of session music, it's like it was so pristinely recorded and so perfectly played that I I think you really want to hear it the right way.
Yeah, I
At
mean,
some point you want to experience that.
yeah.
Asia, not that Steve Lukather plays on Asia, but Asia on LP is way more of an awesome experience. Asia on CD, way more of an awesome experience than listening on streaming.
Totally. Totally. All right. So, Steve, LA kid, started young. I remember a couple years ago, him and I did a clinic together, and in that clinic, we talked a fair amount about his early days, about
Yeah.
how, his high school band, he had Michael Landau was the other guitar player. They've been friends since high school. He
Yeah.
went to the Dick Grove School of Music. He studied with Jimmy Weibel. So he was at a young age a, what we would consider a pretty educated musician.
That's what's so
You know,
fascinating to me is like how he came out of the gates playing perfectly. And the Jimmy Weibel thing, like he's kind of a deep cut reference for a lot of people, probably.
mm-hmm,
You and I have never talked about Jimmy Weibel before,
mm-hmm,
but like, Jimmy Weibel did a lot of like Western swing kind of stuff, played with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. But as an educator, he has this really deep thing going. You ever mess with the Jimmy Weibel, like I forget what they're called, the solo etudes?
like the 2-line counterpoint stuff,
Yeah.
which is incredibly difficult.
Like if you can learn that, I've only done a couple of them, but
Yeah.
when I've learned them, I come out of that feeling like empowered in a way where it's like, if I can play this, I
Right.
could figure out anything. It's so heady that if you can make it sound natural, like ripping a sick solo over a tight groove feels like, well within reach. It kind of makes sense, like for that, like of course Lukather studied with him.
Right. And so in high school, he's doing this. And in high school, he had obviously, Landau's rolling around, David Page, keyboard player in Toto's rolling around, the Picaro brothers are rolling around. So his like core lifetime collaborators basically
Yeah,
he
unbelievable.
met them all in high school.
Yeah, and he credits Jeff Picaro specifically as being his mentor. I think on the Wong Notes episode that you guys did with Steve, he specifically says that Jeff Picaro was his mentor, which that's super deep. And just having all these guys around, like I can't imagine, what that would, everybody's just pushing each other to be better, to be tighter, to work, to getting each other gigs. So it makes so much sense to me now, like thinking about that Steve started playing on like big records pretty young.
Yeah. And I remember in the clinic, he did make a big point to say how Joe Picaro, the father, who
Mhm.
was a professional percussionist, was like, and he was around too, and it was something to see like that's a professional musician working. Like
Yeah.
it was inspiring him as a kid to be like, well, not only one, you can do this. Two, this is somebody who's actually doing it.
Yeah. So,
Uh,
okay, so obviously Steve, the Picaros, they start, not just the three of them, they start Toto. Talk to me about Toto. You've seen them live.
yes.
What's your relationship with Toto and their music?
So a lot of people call Toto yacht rock. And I think they have yacht rock tendencies. I think there's
They do appear
a decent
in
amount.
the titular YouTube series Yacht Rock.
Right? Yes. But I think they are more than that. I wouldn't say they're like the kings of yacht rock. I mean, what's their quintessential yacht rock tune? Africa?
Oh, I think Rosanna.
You think Rosanna more?
I think Rosanna is like a pretty breezy tune.
Right? But then they have, Hold the Line and some other ones that are just straight up rock tunes.
Well, they're
Nobody's Hold the Line's not going to make a yacht rock playlist,
no, but they're
right?
yacht rock with a little bit of an edge.
See, I think I think it's the other way. I think they're a rock band who likes to dabble in yacht rock.
Okay, I'll give you that.
think
Yeah,
that.
I do think because if you think about the entirety of Toto's output, something I want to mention about Toto, that I'll mention here is Toto did the soundtrack for David Lynch's Dune.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard that?
Mm-mm.
They work with Brian Eno on it. That is not yacht rock. That is like
No.
awesome futuristic sci-fi music. So if somebody came to me and I said something cool about Toto and they were like, Toto's super cheesy, I'd be like, okay, check this out. And it's just a totally different thing. It's this 80s futuristic prog thing that I really love.
Mhm.
So it's like they could shapeshift in a bunch of different ways. But yeah, I would give you Hold the Line is not a yacht rock song, but they could definitely do yacht rock. And I would say that while the band isn't necessarily a yacht rock band, Steve Lukather has worked with so many of the main actors in yacht rock that he is, among other things and other, wide ranging things, he is also a yacht rock guitar player.
Yeah. And I think that band's versatility was largely because that core group of the band were A-list session cats that would be getting called on every record to do a million different things, Like trying to go through Lukather's session work is
Oh
I
man.
mean,
Yeah.
it's never ending. It's I guess you'll never really know how many albums he played on, but word is 1,500, and that wouldn't surprise me at all. You know, probably his most famous session work is probably on Thriller and Beat It.
I feel like that's where his name comes up the most. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And hearing all those parts, and again, he wasn't the only guitar player on that, but you can definitely tell when he starts, because there's this thing he does that I feel like every session player in the 80s owes him royalties, is this little like muted 2 or 3 note groove, single note groove. So you know what I'm talking about?
Owns that vibe.
Muted little thing. I think there's one track so we're just going to talk about our 3 tracks. One of the tracks that I picked kind of starts off with that. It's an instrumental track, a Toto instrumental track. And that, to me, that is quintessential Lukather. It's like, hey, I have this, eighth note groove, these chord changes going along. Let me find a couple common notes that work, or maybe ones that are just like a half step away. And you can create this little rhythmic, muted, funky part that works. Human Nature. I mean, it's on there. Like, that to me is quintessential Lukather rhythm playing.
So, to you, when you're listening to a song that has Steve Lukather on it, and maybe I'm thinking of a studio track, not necessarily a Toto thing, but that's different. He's part of the creative process in a different way. But when you hear one of these songs that have Lukather, do you think that he excels most, or maybe it's pointless to separate these things, but to me, I have an opinion about it. Do you think he excels most as a rhythm player, a backup player, or as a soloist? I will say, while you think about that, my thought is his parts that he comes up with and his ability to like play over a song that might just be 2 or 3 chords and then play a cool part. I'll get to it later, but there's a song he played on that specifically he came up with the part to, that it's just like, that's the best. That's the thing that gives the song its feel. And I feel like he delivers that on a lot of songs. His solos, I think, are almost, this is a credit to his musicianship, but also is going to sound like a backhanded thing. And I don't mean it like that, because this is actually even harder to do. His solos feel so perfect to the song that I don't always feel like I'm totally identifying like his personal voice in them. You know, it's like I hear this amazing solo and it's like that's the perfect solo that goes with this song. Versus on Beat It, Eddie Van Halen comes in and it's like, okay, it's the perfect solo. Why is that the perfect solo that fits the song? It's not because that's what the song called for. It's because Eddie Van Halen sounds like Eddie Van Halen and delivers one of his best performances.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's always what you get from Lukather. I don't think that that's the gig. His gig is to come in and play the thing, and then somebody else is going to go on tour most of the time and have to play that
Play those
solo.
parts. Yeah.
And the thing about that that's also so amazing, other than just like the musical perfection of the whole thing, is that, you know, these are his main body of work is from the tape era. And, you know, he said it that like a lot of stuff's 1, 2, 3 takes maybe, but they're not doing 19 takes for him to work out a solo. He's ripping the perfect solo for the song on the first shot. So it's like Eddie, you know, however Eddie constructed the Beat It solo, for example, it's like he's doing his thing there and it's worked out on his techniques and his idea and his sound, versus like Lukather can hear the song and just like translate the music. And I think that that is such an impressive skill set.
And it's a different way of improvising, because you might just see on the part E minor.
Yeah.
It might just be chord changes E minor. And he's coming up with whether it's like that eighth note muted thing or some kind of open string thing, arpeggio thing, you know, like that kind of improvisation is such in some ways, a more unique skill than being able to blow over changes, you know?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't,
No boundaries.
there's no boundaries, and you got to have a deeper sense of songcraft, you know, kind of that you have to know about in order to make those parts work. Like when you think about the guitar part to Human Nature, you know, it's, he'll hear the chord. And basically, I'm sure they probably said, okay, here are the chords, D, B minor, blah, blah, blah. And he was able to weave through and make something like that. And I'm sure that probably happened, you know, 10 times a day with him.
Yeah. And a lot of improvisers, like I like a lot of, you know, we've covered some of them. We will continue covering them. I like a lot of guitar players that have sort of like, you know, a little bit of like an arch musical personality, or like take things a little sideways, or put their vibe into everything they do. And, you know, I think that that's really cool, but that's actually in a way, once you've established your thing, it's actually easier to do that than to play something that is like studio perfect, meant to be played on the radio, meant to be a hit and not distract from the star, from the vocalist or the band or whatever. You're supplementing it, you're making that better, not having a show off spot for yourself or to get your like own motives across.
Right. All right, man. Let's pick our 3 tracks that we want to point people to each, and you are going to go
Toto
first.
tracks on the table. I thought.
Oh yeah,
I thought
anything he
okay.
plays on, man. Anything. Okay. But I will say, I think I only picked. Okay, 2 of my 3 are Toto tracks. I didn't go into any of his session work. Is the route I took.
Oh,
not that those
okay.
aren't off the table.
I'm gonna keep it session. You do Toto.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm glad you're picking Rosanna, so I don't have to.
Not picking Rosanna. Didn't make the cut.
Am I gonna have to?
Although the outro Rosanna solo is infinitely better than the main solo.
Okay. All right,
that
what do
can
you
be
got?
my hot take. Oh, you're going first. You go first on this one.
I'm going first.
Yeah.
Should I start big or with a deeper cut?
Oh, big.
I'm gonna start big. I've referenced this before. Michael McDonald, I Keep Forgettin. Wow. First off, I love that song more than, 98% of songs. And I don't know about you, but Nate Dogg and Warren G's Regulate was like, that was big for me when that came out. And then as I grew older and aged into becoming a Michael McDonald fan, it's like, I Keep Forgettin just like took took that spot in my brain.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's just like nostalgically in there that I'm always going to love that. But Steve's sound. Okay, first off, Steve said on Wong Notes that he was just given a chord. Like you mentioned, he was just given a chord. He came up with the part. The groove of that song, boom, tch, boom, tch, right? Amazing. Totally the thing. But then he sparkles that guitar part right in that groove with the very most perfect tone. The tone is such a big part of it. He's just playing a couple notes. It's got to be like a tri-stereo chorus kind of sound, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unbelievably perfect. And the whole song, the arc of that song is so amazing too, because it's like, it's so tight all the way through. And they, you know, they're building it. It's dramatic. They have this really, really nice arc to the song. At the very end of the song on the outro, that's when it doesn't open up like into a solo or anything. There's a couple, everybody plays like their own really simple fill. And Steve just does a couple stabs. Nothing technically hard. It's just so perfectly placed to loosen up a little bit and break the tension that has been established throughout the whole song. He does something different. I could listen to that over and over and over again. If that's the only thing he's ever done, I would still know the name Steve Lukather.
There we go. All right. Are you doing all your three, then my three, or are we going back and forth?
You're going now.
Okay. This is a bit of a deep cut. I had to go to YouTube to find it because from what I can tell, again, the streaming makes it hard to really kind of track this down. But the song's Toto song called Animal.
Okay.
And he had mentioned it in the clinic a little bit, or somebody had asked him about it or whatever, and he was kind of like, oh wow, that's one I hadn't heard about in a while. But it's such like an unhinged, ripping solo. Like to me, that kind of thing is so Lukather. It's this huge, stereo rock tone. And he is, with this very wide vibrato. You know what? I hear a lot of his vibrato in Zakk Wylde. Only because I recently did something with Zakk Wylde.
That's an interesting take. Okay.
I hear this just very like shaking vibrato. But it's like I said, you could probably find it on YouTube, but it's one of the underground, I'd say top 5 solos from Lukather is the Animal solo.
Okay.
Worth checking out.
I like that we have very divergent paths here in our favorite things about Steve Lukather.
All right.
All right. So the next one for me, this is going to seem like unnecessarily deep cut, but maybe not. The title track from Herbie Hancock's 1982 album, Light Me Up. I don't think it's by any reach Herbie's best record. It is not his shining hour.
No.
It's coming after a hot period and before another hot period. It's just one of these records that are in between. It's like Herbie was looking for the new thing. This is just my take on it, but Herbie's like looking for his new thing. He knows he's got to find a new thing, and he hadn't found hip hop yet. So he did this record, and like, it's all the cats we were talking about are on there. Lukather and his buddies. So, it sounds exactly like what it is. It's not a surprise if you put those things together. But Lukather's soaring lead sound, he doesn't play anything tricky. He just plays the melody. There's a good chance, I think, in this situation, I don't know, but, based on what I know about Herbie as a composer, he probably wrote the melody for him. It's not necessarily like here's a chart with E minor, maybe not. But it's just his feel, his sound, hearing him in Herbie's music, which I love Herbie's music just so much. That's a favorite for me.
That's a good one. That's a deep cut. I'm not even familiar with that Herbie record.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason.
Fair enough. All right. Another Toto track I have here. Instrumental track, Jake to the Bone. Okay. It's off 1992's Kingdom of Desire. It's a 7-minute track. I hear elements of Snarky Puppy in this track. I played a little bit before
Yep.
we started
No, I hear
recording.
it. That's a pretty timeless sounding track.
Yeah, Jake to the Bone there's some incredible playing on it. They, needed some space to really stretch out on it. It's probably an underrated Toto. I don't think that album was received as well as some of their other things. But it's a really interesting record. Keltner's on it. There's horn. There's a bunch of studio cats on it in addition to the core 4 members. Richard Page does backing vocals. Fogerty does backing vocals on it. That's
Wow.
that's a deep cut, right? Joe Picaro, Lenny Castro's on it. Steve Picaro plays synth on it. It's an interesting record, but I would probably just skip right to Jake to the Bone and hear, him just totally rip. I was hoping when I saw Toto like 2 years ago, and it was the tour they're doing with Journey, so it wasn't like a full set, so to speak. I was just hoping they would just sneak Jake to the Bone in the set. I think that would
deep
be
cut action.
deep cut. Just open up with that, but yeah, check out Jake to the Bone.
So I'm so tempted to just like rattle on and on about Rosanna and how much I love Rosanna, how I love the form of Rosanna, how I love Steve's parts. But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stick to my thing because I have another point to make, which is Olivia Newton-John's Physical. That's Lukather on there.
Yep.
That song, first off, Lukather aside, I kind of feel like that was such a popular song, and it's like because it's Olivia Newton-John, it's like it's a little bit, I don't know, people don't take it super seriously as like a pop gem.
Right.
It's a great song. That is a
Mhm.
well-written tune. I really love it. The groove is great. It feels good, and it's so catchy. When I hear it once, I have to hear it a couple times. Like over the course of a couple days, I have to hear it a couple times because it gets stuck in my head. Lukather sounds great. On here, though, this is, I think, an example. I believe, like back in the day, the guitar solo would get cut for radio edits. That was
Yeah.
like it was a single thing. But you listen to the guitar solo on this song, and this exemplifies what I was talking about before. You hear that, and it's like, that's the perfect guitar solo for this song. And it's amazing. Like, this dude, he didn't sit down and write this out. These weren't notes on a page. He just blazed this solo in the studio, and you listen to it and just say, that's so perfect. And
Yep. All right.
And I appreciate that.
I'm going way off the record on this one. This is a track that features Eddie Van Halen, features Steve Lukather, features Jeff Babco, keyboard player on the Jimmy Kimmel Band. John Pierce is on bass, Greg Bissonette on drums. And it is from a record. It's kind of hard to find. Came out in 2003 called Sentimental. And it's Lukather's Christmas record. And it's the track Joy to the World, featuring Steve Lukather and one Eddie Van Halen. And first of all, I would highly just recommend this Christmas record. Like, there's a lot of, Eddie's on it, Vi's on it, Slash is on it, Landau's on it. Steve's son Trevor is playing guitar on it. Simon Phillips plays tambourine. Edgar Winter's on it. Scott Hamilton, skater, sings backing vocals on it.
Okay.
It's a pretty fun record. Unfortunately, I don't think it's on streaming. This is one of the things. I don't think it's on streaming. So, yeah. So my pick.
It's a pretty deep cut.
It's a pretty deep cut, but it's like, hey, Lukather and Eddie Van Halen playing Joy to the World. That's all I want to hear.
It's funny that you mentioned this because I think that the first time I ever heard Steve Lukather knowingly and knew that it was him and was aware of who he was, like from like I said, from guitar magazines and stuff. But the first album that I had that his name appeared on was do you remember the compilations? This was volume 2 that he's on. Merry Xmas.
Mm-hmm. I had both of them.
He played on Volume 2, Merry Xmas, More Guitars for Christmas. He plays the lead-off track, the Christmas song. And that was the first time I knew I was listening to Steve Lukather.
Is that the same version that's on this record?
I don't know. This was from 1998. I suppose it could be.
Is it with him and Larry Carlton? I don't know if you're looking it up. Oh, okay.
It's John Pena on bass, Simon Phillips on drums, and it looks like he plays all the guitars. David Garfield on keys.
So there's been some great guitar Christmas records. And
Are
the
we
Merry
going to have
Xmas
a special Christmas version of the 100 Guitars podcast?
We might need to have bonus Christmas guitars.
We're ideating right now.
Joe Pass's 6-string Santa.
Oh, wow.
That's a good one.
I don't know that one.
You got to check. That's on streaming. You can check that out.
Okay.
All right. Honorable mention, though, is the Los Lobotomies record from 92. It's his jazz fusion group. Oh, man.
Oh, I don't know
It's his jazz fusion group. It's Lukather, Jeff Picaro, Will Lee, Lenny Castro, Joe Sample, Carlos Vega, and Vinny Colaiuta on drums together. And it's like his like jam fusion group.
Man, I gotta check that out.
Great. It's really good. The tone sounds like it was recorded in 1992, you know, has a bit of that dated production vibe to it, or maybe it's 89. It was like late 80s, early 90s, I think, is when it was recorded and released. But it's all instrumental, and it's, you know, they'll do Little Wing and All Blues and Purple Haze. But yeah, it's well worth checking out for some prime, just unfiltered Lukather, for sure.
So I think that we've made a good case for Steve Lukather's inclusion.
Yes.
As one of our 100 guitar players that we think you should know. You know, I think that you and I sometimes wonder, or, you know, we haven't really had to wonder. Sometimes we've done an episode on somebody and they've reached out to us and thanked us for being part of the list and, or, you know, for doing an episode on them. So before we, you know, Steve, reach out if you're listening. But I was preparing for this podcast and listening to another podcast that you work on, the Corey Wong podcast, and thinking about, I wonder, you know, I want to make sure we do this right and like cover the whole thing. I was like, is Steve Lukather going to like being on our list? And he answered for me. He answered the question as I was thinking it, basically. So him and Corey are rapping about, you know, perception of guitar players and stuff like that. And he drops this.
All those critics, they hate anybody with major facility. If you look at their top 100 and you realize who's on and who's not, it kind of tells you that most of these guys are frustrated guitar players and only like guys they can play like. If anybody that has chops over their head, they hate.
I mean, that's not us.
Nope.
That's not us.
No.
We got Lukather. We got him covered. Man.
I think we just got the Lukather nod.
Appreciate Steve Lukather.
I think we just got the Lukather nod in that clip. He didn't even
kind
know
of
he
feels
was given
a
tacit endorsement of everything we're doing. But hey, that's how I hear it.
That's how I hear it too. I mean, 100 guitarist list. That was in 2020. He was already thinking about like he was putting that out there like you guys would do it right.
He was looking at me.
Would do this right. He was looking at you. Yeah.
He was looking right at me when he said that. He's like,
Premier Guitar is the right place for 100 guitarists.
You're gonna get it right. You're gonna get it right. And then we ended up doing a clinic that clinic we did was in January of 2023. Was when we did that clinic together. It was at Satriani's camp. And it was so surreal. Like I'm standing there on stage sitting with him and I'm basically interviewing him in front of a crowd. And, you know, and there's Joe Satriani and Peter Frampton and Steve Morse and Corey Wong and Eric Gales and John Five all sitting, you know, in the audience or on the side stage or whatever watching him. So that was no pressure at all. But
that's awesome.
But we got through it. So all right, Nick, I think we got it.
I think we got Steve Lukather. I think we covered a wide range of his work. And of course, there's always more to listen to. If you want to tell us about your thoughts on Steve Lukather, what we missed, what you liked about what we covered, whatever, or talk about another guitar player, hit us up, get at us, 100 Guitarists. That's 100 Guitarists at premierguitar.com. Call, text us 319-423-9734. And wherever you're checking this out today, don't forget to review, rate, subscribe.
Right, subscribe. And thanks again to EMG Pickups for sponsoring today's episode. Just a reminder, you can use code EMG100 for 15% off at checkout. So head on over to the website and pick yourself up some Lukather-esque pickups.
That's right. All right, we'll see you next week.
All right, we'll see you next week.